record on this. There. Thank you very much for that reminder. Okay, so some business things to get out of the way. I absolutely thought this was a crazy idea and thought I would get like 10 people on the call and that this would be kind of book clubby. And that was how I'd planned it. And we'd all be able to chat and so on. 110 people have registered. We'll see how many actually show up on a regular basis. But what it means is this is possibly going to end up being one of the larger Zoom calls I've ever been on. I've asked my friend Saren to help manage things a little bit. So if I'm not able to look at the screen and see you all, she may be able to call out some questions. I'm going to try and have us all just be careful and keep ourselves on mute when we don't have a question and be responsible about taking yourself on and off mute. If that doesn't get too chaotic, I'm happy to just let it go that way. But if with 100 people, that's sometimes hard to manage. So what I'm telling you is starting out, feel free to stop and ask me questions as I'm going, even when I'm at the torch or whatever. If I can't answer in the moment, I'll say so. And also feel to make active use, as people are already doing, of the chat to ask questions that you can all share answers that you have as well. I'm certainly not the only expert on this, and I'm not even nearly the top expert in terms of years of experience and skills. I have my set of skills. You all have different experiences and approaches. And I'm a firm believer in learn from as many people as you can, take as many classes as you can, share ideas, share tools. I will ask that you take real personal responsibility about any safety issues. John often says, you're the last line of defense for your own safety. You're the one who has to decide what is safe and what is not for you. So I'm taking no responsibility for your work at home in your own studios. Please do that for yourself. As a reminder, we are in fact recording, and that means that you've given me permission to use your screen imagery and or voice and or text, whatever you put up here, as part of the recordings. I will be trying to make those recordings public, but I can't guarantee it'll be fast. So it won't be like next week I'll have this recording. It might be a month or two from now before I have them available for easy follow through. And those will probably be on YouTube. I have to figure out whether I have enough space or whether I need to host them someplace else. Remember that there are 2 separate registration links, and therefore you should have 2 separate emails that came back to you, one for the first Wednesdays and one for the third Wednesdays. So use the appropriate one. I have about 4 people that didn't sign up for both. So if you're one of those people, you may want to check and register for the second session if you want to attend everything. I'm not repeating what I do on the first with the third. It's going to be continuing on just twice a month. We talked about moderating. At the end of each session, I'm going to try to do a what's coming next so that you know whether it's a session you want to skip out on or whatever. And again, it's totally up to you if you want to actively participate and try to follow along as I'm going, or whether you want to do your own pace or you want to come and go and do only certain projects. If you are following along and you get ahead of me, I would ask that you hold any questions about future projects until I've reached that stage, just because I'm trying to keep a specific rhythm for myself, but feel free to go at whatever pace works for you. It's just, I don't want to interrupt people who are staying with the pace that I'm doing with project questions that are coming up in future sessions. Like I said, there's lots of talking at the beginning of this one, so I'm just trying to get through it all. Absolutely ask questions. We've got a really big range of experience levels here, I suspect, just based on what people have been answering when I email with them. Some people that have never done any setting of stones, others who are well into the process and just looking at John's techniques. For my sake, I have done most of the settings in his book, some more successfully than others. Some I use frequently. What I'm going to be trying to do is, even if I've learned it a way that I tend to do differently, I'm going to try to do it the John way so that I get the experience of the book and the teaching and find out if there's something I've been missing. Let's see what else we got. Okay. In case it's not obvious, I'm not John Cogswell. I never will be. This is not a John Cogswell class. Just putting that out there. It's a going through John's book class. It is not a replacement to just sit in on this overbuying his book. Please support the artist. Please buy John's book if you don't have it already. I personally have 3 copies now. One that I got specifically to mark up for this project because I knew I'd be putting a lot of notes and commentary that I wanted to pull out for the sake of the project. One that's my original that has his signature in it that I'll try to not muck up. And then I also got it on Kindle, I guess, in this case. I will warn you that if you get the Kindle edition, it is far less well edited and it does not have great image to content matchup. Like it doesn't scroll well and read as well. When I'm referencing, I'm going to talk to you about the pagination in the book if there's something that I'm trying to point out, but I'll also try to reference any chapter headers and things like that so that if your book isn't the same, I don't know if he had editions of it, whether it changed a little bit where the pages are, but I'll try to give you.
Rachel, yep, can you spotlight yourself so that if other people flash in, they don't take away the screen?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the reminders. Okay, so again, whatever pace I'm going. I'm doing them almost entirely in the order of going through the book, with a slight deviation in terms of when I pause to set things. Because what I will be doing, and I'll show you the pile of stones I've been gradually amassing, what I'm going to be doing is building a sampler of settings. So for some of the stones, I may choose to make more than one of the settings and then decide after I've made them which one I'm going to actually set the stone in. So that's just my approach. You can go ahead and do all the tasks in exactly the order you want, but like, for example, making a bezel pusher, we're probably going to do at the beginning of next session, even if we get to it in the book, rather than stopping and setting stones in between. I'm absolutely terrified by this undertaking. I'll confess that right out of the gate. Oop, I got to give you my face back instead of just staring at stones. This is a huge deal, and part of the reason that I put it out to the world is so that I will follow through. I'm comfortable teaching. I'm comfortable being a student. I've never been this weird multiple duality, somewhere in between kind of thing. So it's going to be an interesting challenge for me, one that I'm super excited about, but still a little scared of, especially after 100 people signed up. So general suggestions for the book. I already talked about getting multiple copies if you want. Don't skip the notations on the images. I always encourage students to have a separate notebook specific to a project. I like hardbound, just so that I keep the pages in there and I don't have a tendency to want to tear something out. I also recommend dating any sketches you're doing, and sort of it gives you a pointer for progress. I never scribble anything out. I just put an X across it if I don't like something I've drawn. And I also would encourage you to possibly set some goals for why you're doing this for yourself if you haven't already. For me, the biggies that I'm working on are taking the time it needs to be done, so I'm not rushing or skipping steps. I find that the more I practice, the more I tend to speed up and figure I can skip certain things, and I'm trying to slow back down. I'm trying to use John's way as much as possible, and I'm trying to work on taking the time to sketch and improve those things. So that's my out of the gate update and ramble. Any questions before we dig into chapter 1? Anyone? Okay, you can post them in chat. You can pop off mute and ask me directly. So with that in mind, let's talk about chapter 1. In chapter 1, he is really working on getting ready, understanding the stones, and thinking about them a lot. And so while there's not a real hands-on exercise for this, what I've chosen to do is look at stones more closely than I normally would. So let me bring up, I'm hoping that shows, is that showing so that you can actually read text on it, or is it reversed for you guys? Is that visually?
It's not reversed, but not reversed, but it's a little far away.
A little far away. So I'm gonna hold it up, but this document, a template of this document is up on the Facebook group. I see Natasha's asking about how long the section will be. I'm aiming for between 2.5 to 3 hours for each session. And after this session, the last 15 minutes of each session will be show and tell and Q&A. I was thinking it was going to be 10 or 12 people, it would be just sort of a round robin book club style. But since we have so many, I think we're just going to have to set aside time each session for people to share. So yeah, the text that I've written is too light. I've got to go the right way, probably for you guys to really see, but I wanted more for you to have the concept of it. What I'm doing is picking stones for each project and tracking things on it, like what is the stone, what is the material, what is the cut and shape, these attributes that he talks about when thinking about stones. I haven't filled every bit of it out, but it broadly gives me a sense, so that this is really for me to start giving more thought when I pick stones. Early on, when I was working with gems, I would sort of pick, ooh, that's shiny and pretty, and I like how it looks. But now I'm being more picky and looking at things like, is it a good girdle that I'm working with? So is it a fairly consistent girdle all the way around, or is it wobbly? Are there inclusions in it, and am I okay with them, or do they look like they're consequential enough that they might become fracture points and so on? So I'm making note, and you won't be able to see it because of the lightness probably, but I'm making note when I see marks in the stones, and a good one was an inclusion. So if I've got marks in the stone, I try to lay them out where they are in the drawings and so on. And I'm also taking the opportunity to try and get better at least rough sketching the settings that I think that stone might work with. So what John's talking about in this section a lot is choosing for both form and function, and knowing that the stone is right for the setting and vice versa, and for the project. So getting to know the shapes of your stones better. I'm also excited to play with some shapes I've never set before. So for example, I've never set tongue settings, a tongue cut stone, which is sort of an intriguing one, where it's literally semi-domed, semi-edged. So that's a neat shape that it's a little hard to find. So that I haven't set before. I've never set conical stones, which super hard to find people who are cutting cones, but I think it's a neat idea, and it creates a challenge because the sides just go up. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'm picking and I'm considering which of the many settings in the book a given stone might be able to be set in. Some of them just aren't appropriate for some of the settings. So consider whether it's got the durability, the ability to be set in that for your project. I'm not working on projects, I'm working on settings. So if you prefer to design your settings with a specific project in mind, make sure that it's going to stay. You know, a pearl set on a post on a ring is going to be really iffy, that it doesn't get knocked off. But a pearl set in something concave inside of a hollow form is a lot more stable. So what is the form and what is the function is a lot of what I'm seeing in his preparation chapter. He has one really lovely quote, though, that I really like, that isn't always available if you're doing, professional bench jewelry and somebody's coming in to buy their wedding band. His quote is, "Buy what appeals to you." I really like that idea of, design to what grabs your interest. So the exercise I'm recommending, similar to what I've done here, is that you look over your existing stone collection with fresh eyes, maybe doing some measuring, adding some labeling to them, most scale, some descriptive properties of the cut and the finish, Noting if there are any treatments done to it. You know, is it color, is it heat treated or anything like that? Noting any eye visible inclusions and flaws. Evaluate their silhouettes and think about not just a stone setting that you could use for it, but looking through the book, does this stone work with A, B, or C settings or multiples? So I'm trying to give myself some choices here. And if, like me, you want to practice your sketching, go for it. You know, keep a book that you're actually practicing, whether it's simple pencil sketch or whether you go pull out some watercolors and do scale drawings of it with really careful highlighting and that sort of thing. It's up to you. Design considerations. The function factor is the biggest thing that he talks about. And I really like that John brings forth the function first. Because we're, you know, a lot of art teaching is about function should never outweigh form and vice versa. But in truth, if your stone's going to fall out, it's not going to work. You know, the setting needs to be adequate to the task is what it comes down to. So I like the idea of thinking about the environment, thinking about the wear and tear that this piece is going to take, the fragility, and, you know, if the material, an opal, lots of people want opals as their wedding stone, but not necessarily a good choice. The comfort of the wearer, is it going to poke them? Is it going to overweight and spin the ring that it's on? The position for how it's being set within the design, will you be able to get to it to set it in each kind of setting? So sometimes having, for example, walls all the way around, you're not going to be able to set entirely. Oops, to my face. Sorry. Thank you. I've got somebody giving me clues. So what else? Is it basically, is it stylistically compatible? Because not all stone settings, you know, visually have the impact of, say, a modern piece, or are more appropriate if it's a basic band than if it's a fancy pendant or something. Is it going to overtake the piece? So look at your stone collection with John's ideas in mind, and then maybe take a second pass and look at them to see whether there are any form or function risks amongst your stones, which would keep you away from certain settings. So there's a proactive choosing of, this could look good in setting A, B, or C, but there's also the task of what would preclude using that setting for that stone. And so I'm working through the series of stones that I've picked. Where you're going to actually see me setting, or you're going to see me building the settings for most of these over the course of this, not literally all of them, because I'm still giving myself some choices. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to make sure we talked about in the first chapters. Did anybody have, in going through the first couple chapters, did any of you find questions? That's really the first chapter, the stone picking. Any open questions? Are people buying stones for this project? I know I went out and bought a bunch in shapes that I didn't have before.
No, but I've been having some fun going through the stuff I already have.
Nice, nice. Is that Francesca with the many shelves? No?
That's me. Yes, that's me.
Yeah, you've got a lot of stones to choose from. Okay, so the next chapter, I think that was pretty much what I wanted to focus on chapter 1, which is nice and brief, but it's about thinking about your conscious design choices. Section 2, I'm going to switch gears and go over to the table. If you're like me, you might be a tool junkie. I suspect we have a fair number of tool junkies. Tell me if my voice gets too far away, given the miking situation I have. The tools for this project can go on into infinity. And I've done a little bit of shopping. Not all of this is new for the sake of this, but I wanted to, for your sake, especially if you're new to stone setting, I wanted to talk about some of the ones that are the most basics And if you want to budget chapter by chapter, there's certain ones that I think, based on what John's outlining in here, that are really worth pulling forth earlier in the project, some like gotta haves for the whole process, and some that you can hold off till later. So a few things that are really important, you're going to want to buy in order to be ready to prep them. So for example, if you don't have gravers already, and I believe he recommends numbers 52, which is a round graver, 42, which is a flat graver, and 12.6, I'll have to check the book again. But getting those as the basics, so that we can do a proper fitting of it. I did not enjoy working with gravers much until I discovered that it was primarily because they weren't fitted well to my hands, because I have fairly small hands. And so he's got a really lovely section on how to sharpen and prep them, and that includes fitting of them, which we'll do during one of the sessions for, I think it's chapter 4. So you don't need to have that until chapter 4. The other thing is the magical adjustment he does to straight cross-locking tweezers. And it makes all the difference in the world when working on prong settings in particular. So I recommend getting a couple pairs at least, and make sure that they be steel, not titanium, because the prep that we do on them makes it really easy to snap if they're the other materials. So try to get steel, try to get heat protective and straight. And if you want to modify along with me, I'll be doing that as part of the series. Other basics, he goes that we're going to do a making and modifying some bezel pushers. So one's made out of nails, and he also talks about making them out of steel rod and out of brass rod. You don't have to get all of the above. If you've got a pack of 16 penny nails at home, that's good enough. You just want that, and you want some handles that have the steel wrapper around the end. Don't get plain old wooden knobbed handles, because anything we're stabbing into wood and putting a lot of pressure on, we don't want whatever's in it to stab us at the other end. So the steel gives a little bit of protection from that. So those are all things we're going to work towards in terms of actually doing the exercises he recommends for modifying. But in the basics list, and I realize I should have typed this up for you guys, and I may type it up and post it in the Facebook group. But you absolutely want quality measuring devices. And I'll fess up. My dad was a math professor for a lot of his life, and I grew up gradually hating math more and more as a result of it, because he did higher math, and I had to go to him with my homework and then learn crazy ways that had nothing to do with what my teachers wanted me to do. So I'm not a fan of the math part of stone setting, and therefore I very much prefer an electronic gauge, electronic calipers for myself. It's more precise. I don't have the precision when I'm reading the manual tools, but that's me. So whatever works for you. Just have good quality measuring tools, because it makes all the difference in setting your stones. Obviously a saw blade and saw and assorted blades. And John tends to jump all over the map. There's a lot of fairly thin blades that he recommends using, as well as certain situations where you need heavier. Square, dividers, all those kinds of measuring things. Good sandpaper, and this is a mod I'm not going to do it on screen, but you can do for yourself, where I just got a piece of plexiglass, and I've created a sanding panel with wet dry sandpaper that just goes 320, 400, 600, 1,000. So he lists how to do that in the book. Let's see, some kind of setting material. So I haven't worked with the shellac before, so I figured I'd get some to play around with. Jet set is good too. He lists that as an alternative, but you'll want something to do your setting in. An array of drill bits and setting burrs, a basic mallet, hammer, that sort of thing. Obviously some Sharpies are always handy, and paper and or manila folders. In the files world, the ones to not skip are barrette files and flat files right out of the gate, and a needle file set. Later on, there's some other files that you'll want for some of the more advanced settings. Mandrels, but again, he's a big fan of use what you got. So mandrels can be anything from a die punch to actual, manufactured mandrels. And those are just helpful if you're going to play along at home with all of the others, all of the shapes of settings. Bezel pushers and burnishers, and having a good pair of parallel jaw pliers. So those are the things that you could easily get through the first 3 chapters with. And then in chapter 4, we start to add some specialty things that we can go into as we get to those. Any questions? Nope. Okay. So, somebody mentions Statura for stones. That's great. And yes, their pearls are fantastic. I think they also sell a really nice little pocket set of bezel mandrels, which I'll pop up here. So I think they have a really nice set of the baby mandrels. If they're still selling them, that's where I got mine years ago. So I don't know whether they're still there, but they come in like 9 shapes or something in one kit. I just wish they came in a more durable box. Let's see what else we got. Any other questions up there? Okay, no, good. Keep chatting amongst yourselves. So a note that I didn't see in the book, unless I missed it, about tools that John would always say is buy the best you can afford. And that there's some priorities to that, meaning, many of us have actual budgets where as much as we can afford depends on how many tools we're buying. So files are one of those top items. Good quality files should be right at the top of the list. Don't cheap out on things that can cause you injury if you're buying something that will break on you. One of the cool things that I had not realized that I want to point out, that John points out in somewhere in chapter 2, is the type of hinge. I'm going to bring that in a little closer. So I had never paid much attention to the quality of the hinges. Looks like I've mostly bought this type of hinge, but the less expensive, I'm trying to think what page that drawing is on. If anybody's there and sees it, let me know. The drawing, there's the drawing.
Page 20.
20.
Yes, page 20. He's got a drawing of pliers that have either lap joints or box joints, and the box joints are more stable. And I had never even thought about that. Oops. Somebody on? There we go. So looking at your pliers and seeing, have you got the ones that have the more stable box joint? It totally makes sense, because you can see when you look at it that they'll pivot if they're out of alignment, if they don't have a box joint. So that was super neat. For those of you that are starting out, the handiest pair of pliers that he talks about that most people don't get when they're first starting is the half round flat pliers. So if you don't own a pair of those, go invest in that profile that he's got. I think it's on that same page. It's number 5 along the images on the top. Just flipping through my notes in the book to make sure there wasn't anything else that was surprising. So if anybody has a good source for quality escapement files, I would love to hear about it, because I haven't found escapements except for old in a long time. So yeah. Leslie's posting about a gemstone gauge, and I don't have time to go clicking through to see it. I'll have to go back and look at everything. Good pair of calipers.
Up with the tool porn already. Geez.
Yeah. Let's see. So we talked about the cross-locking tweezers as being important. Things like beading set and so on. If you want to play along on that stage of it, go ahead and buy it. But if you're on a budget and you want to spread it out, that's going to be out, is what I would say. So don't rush out to buy all the things right out of the gate. And some of these you can make your own instead. I think that's all that I felt needed to be really explicitly covered in the tools. Any open questions? Okay. The Facebook group has a few places that I've been getting stones. I haven't put up a whole lot of tool links yet. Please go ahead and pop those either on screen here or put them in the Facebook group if you join. Let's see, did I have any exercises on this one? Oh, other things that I would spend a fair amount of money on are a good pair of flush cutters and just great calipers. So with that in mind, the first project from chapter 3, basic bezels. I'm hoping to fly through this a bit with my keeping in mind that I need to slow down. And that just because most of the people on the call have likely built basic bezels with a flat back and walls, but no step to them. So I'm going to be doing one that is a round stone. Oops, wrong round. Same idea, but wrong project. I'm going to be doing one that's around, and I tried to be kind to the cameras and buy stones that are a little bigger than I might normally be setting, just so you guys can see them in action a little bit. So I'm going to do one round and one oval. And I did this because I wanted to do one in more basic light gauge, and then something that I don't do a lot in my own work is heavy gauge bezels. I know there are people that are huge fans about it, and so I figured I need to learn a little bit more about them. So the chalcedony is going to be done in 24 gauge, and I am going to intentionally make it smaller than it should be to walk through that exercise he uses of squeezing to expand the size of the bezel if it is too small. As he says in several places in the book, better too small than too big. You can size up, you can't easily size down.
What do you mean by heavy gauge? Can you clarify?
So yes, sorry, yeah, I'm doing 24 gauge on the chalcedony, and I'm going to do 18 gauge on the oval, on the lapis. You can certainly go heavier than that. It's just, I know that my hand strength is such that even with a hammer set, that's going to be a pushing it for me. So if you want to go heavier than that, go for it.
I have to ask this question really quickly.
Sure.
Because we're all working together in a sense, have you thought about at what point we would all like depart from Zoom and go to our benches to work, or are we going to follow you through the process? And then I'm sure
I had not even thought about that because I didn't think about the fact that people might not have their equipment at their studio.
I do. I would just move away from the computer a little bit.
Got it. Well, so I think that's sort of more of an up to you. I will continue to talk through what I'm doing as I do it. But okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So you'll be talking the whole time while you're working you'll talk yourself through it. I can't even, hats off, by the way, to you for doing that.
The answer is that I will talk as much as I can about articulating the steps I'm doing in the book. Whether you choose to sit there and listen to it all, or want to work along, or want to work a session behind so that you're bringing stuff back to the table next session. That's like this is what I'm talking about trying to sort of wing it when I have so many people joining. I originally thought we would all just sort of be chilling and working along to each other, and I would just talk about what I've found important. So I'm open to suggestions on that, is what I would say. If there are things that people need, and you want pauses where all I'm doing is sitting here and filing while people go back to the bench, I'm cool with that.
I wouldn't necessarily say one way or the other would work, but my thought might be that would you be planning to go over the entirety of the process first, sort of like just talking through it, and then we all can sort of sit together and work while we do the actual making of the piece?
So talk through before I even touch my hand to the metal. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe like sort of go through the steps that will be followed, even though it's in the book, obviously, but I'm just wondering about like exactly when I should like get up and go over.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And also, given that it's going to be 2.5 to 3 hours, we should take a break at some point midstream anyhow for stretching and stuff. Let me think about that. On these earlier ones, I can certainly talk through the steps that I will be doing. What I don't want to do is be reading from John's book, basically. It's his copyrighted material. People should have a copy of his book to play along if they want that level of detail. And my goal was to talk through sort of what I'm going through as a student. The stuff I've done so far has felt very teacherly already, and I want to talk about my experience with it, but I can talk about the parts that I think are important to the process and then step back from it and pause and I can slow it down enough that I'm just doing my hands-on bits and pieces while you guys go back to your benches if you choose.
Excuse me, may I just suggest,
Sure.
for at least for this first one, go ahead and how you were thinking you were going to do it. And then, we can all see how it works.
Good feedback. Okay. I was literally going to pull out some metal. Any other thoughts from anyone? Sorry.
Rachel, I do. This is Barbara Miner.
Hey.
I think you should do what you intended to do. I think that our opinion doesn't matter, that you have an idea of how you wanted to present the information, and you are the person that we're coming to listen to. And all of this is a distraction.
Okay.
Us working at the same time, if we want to work at the same time, we can mute ourselves and work.
Sure.
But you should do what you intended to do.
Okay.
I second that.
Okay. So, yeah, let's start out that way. Let me put it out there though.
I like that too, Rachel.
Pardon?
I like that idea too.
Okay. I'm going to put it out there. I'll go ahead with that, but I'm going to put it out there that I'm open to evolving this process because it's so unfamiliar to me working with this many people. So I'll start with, I was going to make myself a round bezel out of 24 gauge. And
Rachel,
yep,
it looks like a rose quartz. What are the dimensions? What are the millimeters on that?
I have that on my sheet.
Hey.
Let me get the sheet up for everyone. So this is, it's actually a pink chalcedony. I am terrible at knowing which families are actually just other names for things.
Quartz.
It is a quartz, okay? I'll take people's word on that kind of thing. What I've noted about this is that it is a pink translucent, not transparent color. It has no visible flaws in the stone. It is a height of 5.33 millimeters. Length and width being the same. It's 11.87 diameter basically. And that makes the total diameter about 37 millimeters around. This stone has a Mohs rating of 6.5 to 7. And I've given myself 3 choices of settings for this basic bezel. The next one is the shoulder bezel, which I got to tell you, I've never heard anybody but John call it a shoulder bezel. So if folks are used to that term, that's awesome. I've always heard it called a step bezel. So shoulder bezel, and then it's also an option for a prong set or for a card setting, because this is going to have a pretty multi-purpose ability to be set, in my opinion. Any other info you guys want on this stone? So I did pre-measure it, but I will measure it again in case I manage to swap it with the other pink stone that I have.
Rachel, could we see the stone? Spotlight the
Oh,
stone?
I'm sorry, I'm spotlighting the wrong thing. That's good for the reminder. Never be afraid to shout out. Let me get something black behind it. It'll show better.
Rachel, you could always put a piece of tape on the bottom or something of it to distinguish it from the other stone so you don't get
Yes.
confused.
Or I could just remember not to take it out of the box at the same time as the other one. So I will number these as I go. So that's the stone. You can see it's got a fairly decent profile with a good curve to it where I'd expect the curve. And I am going to be creating a 24 gauge wall for it, which is about the lightest that I would ever go in this kind of a stone, in this size of a stone.
Sterling or fine silver?
I'm using sterling. I assume that John uses sterling for everything based on what he said in various classes. It's got a little bit more oomph behind holding the stone. So first task is to measure the stone's height, which does, oops, I must have switched stones. Hang on a sec. See if the other one is shorter. I should have put that number on the back like people suggested. Yeah, this is the smaller one. So this is slightly smaller setup height to the stone. So I've got a height of 5.48. Oh, I didn't mark it down well. John's recommendation here is that you be working between 1/3 and 1/4 of the total height, which puts it lower than a lot of people are used to doing. So if we've got a 5 and, let's see if I can get the center of the stone properly. 5.5, we'll say. So math bad, 5.5. So we're at about 2, just shy of 2, 1.8 or so. Height would put it at the 1/3 mark, which keeps a very low stone. And I always check to see if I'm going to be actually hitting the curve enough. So I think I'm going to go a little bit higher on this stone because it's got a fairly wide band before it starts to curve. So I'm going to go with about a 2.2 on this particular stone. Lock it down. John's recommendation is one that I've used for years and love, which is that you put Sharpie mark down and it shows the line better. And when in doubt, go bigger so that you have room to trim it away. John also says that up to 20 gauge, he's got stronger hands than me. I don't tend to get 20 gauge. He's using a set of shears to cut. I have 2 shears that I particularly like. These are bonsai tree shears, or I like Rio's really basic French shear, the straight French shear, not the curved French shear. One of the notes he makes in the book is about how you hold your shears when cutting. You're not using a scissor cut, you're resting the metal on the bottom edge and cutting downward towards it. I don't know if I can show that angle well enough to show you. So I'm putting it down on the bottom and cutting towards it rather than doing a scissoring motion. So I'm just going to cut a strip. And I'm making way more material than I need. This is going to be a super short little bezel though, which is nice. So he's given us a couple choices for how he tends to do what I'll call casual math on the stone. He takes the diameter and multiplies it by 3.5. In some cases, if you're doing a round stone, and then sizes from there. So if my diameter is, what did I say it was on this puppy? We're just shy of 12. So 11.99, 12 times 3.5 is 36, 42. Do that right? I don't know. So measuring it for 42 millimeters, see how close we get using that logic. It feels so long instead of just fitting it around. Super sensitive little device here. So let's see if I actually mark it at mark, trim it there. We'll see whether that gets me close to my rounding. And I'm just going to use a pair of half round pliers to put a curve in this initially. Feels like it's going to be big. It is. That's given me a lot of overage. So either I did bad math, which is no surprise, or the 3.5 on such a thin bezel is more than I need it to be. To get that a little smoother. So I'm just using the half rounds as a squeezing tool to get the round, to get the curvature into this a little bit, to better size it. Use my scribe, which I probably left out on the bench behind me. Oh, I said I was going to make this one small, didn't I? So I can size it up. So let me cut a little in from where I expect to be. And two different approaches for getting a flush connection. One that he gave us is filing it with care and with a barrette file usually. Since I snipped, it probably won't need a whole lot. The other that he uses is putting it together and sawing between them, which is wonderful. A little bit tricky to do without with a light gauge bezel. However, one trick that he has in the book that I've always struggled with the saw through it on small things like this. On a big ring or something, it's a little easier. But the point that he made is that you're not supposed to be pinching it closed to hold it and get your tight seam to cut. You're supposed to be pushing downward on it, and therefore it won't try to spring away from you. So that was a super cool realization for me, that part of the reason I've been having so much trouble with it was because I was holding it wrong. And it's the little things that make a difference. So he's holding it down, but together, and then sawing through it. I have a blade pulled. Hang on a sec. What are we doing for time? We are at 5:30. Okay. So Maya, no trouble at all if you want to work along. Yeah, and I'm no pressure at all. I didn't mind the question. I never mind that kind of question. It's a good call out. And again, I'm flexing on, like, again, I planned that it would be like 12 of us working in a room, or, you know, in a virtual room, and it's a lot more. So I'm trying to adjust to the many more people of more varied skill sets. So yes, play along at home. And in part, with my trying to slow down factor, that may actually help me take breathers to be like, okay, I've done that stone. Maybe I want to make some notes about what the process was for me and adjust my next project accordingly. Can you guys still see that? Yes. Okay. So I'm trying the make sure that it's connected, but then saw through it approach, because this is something I'm not great with for small activities. And pushing down, not in. Yeah, I still can't hold it well enough to, when it's thin like this, I may be able to do it on the heavier gauge, but down, not in. It just really wants to jump away. I got a little bit of a saw. So I'm gonna make sure that I've got it pinched. And those of you that are playing along at home, by all means, start making your outer bezel. I'm gonna hop over to my bench, my torch. And let me see. So I'm going to need some guidance from folks on the Zoom. Do you want it super zoomed like this? Is that too much? Good?
That's good.
Okay.
That looks perfect.
So John does this thing in the book and in person where he is the magical holder of all tools at once. I'm going to try to do justice to that by holding things the way he holds them, but I am never capable of actually soldering the way that he does. So I want to show what he's doing in the book. He's got his flux brush. Well, I got to zoom out a bit for you to see the whole hand. So he's got his flux brush, he's got his torch, and he's got his pick with the bezel there. And he just sort of juggles the tools. And he points out that we want to be soldering, in this case, on the outside of the bezel. Maybe I'll try it because I haven't tried the John way of holding things in a while. I usually work down on my bench block. A sec, there we go. So I'm going to be using a Prips flux on everything. I'm going to be using a paste flux just to give me some stickiness factor. And then we try holding all the things. I would normally be turning on my vent system, but you all won't be able to hear me past it. He uses a fairly bushy flame for this according to the directions. And he does this with it. So let me see if I can get all of the parts being held the way that he holds them. Is that showing? It's not staying in frame. So he's holding all of these things like this and then grabbing a solder piece that's so small that you can barely see it and positioning it. Oh my God, I just can't cope with this holding all the things. Oh, right. I forgot one thing he does in class that he doesn't actually write down in the book. He double fluxes everything. So he'll heat, reflux, and touch down with a bit of solder. And he's putting it, the book explicitly says, put it on the outside in this case, so that you have less cleanup on the interior that might change the size. Yeah, I didn't double heat. I feel about as graceful as a walrus in a tutu when I'm holding things this way. And so it's flicking past. Oh, I also failed to do the thing that he recommends, which is you heat from the back side opposite the, really not in position, is it? Bear with me. Opposite the seam so that it starts to close together. So I'm not sure I actually managed to solder that. Oh, maybe I did. Let me see. Yep. Okay, so we got to solder on that using the many things in the hands trick. Many things in your hands trick, but it's awkward for me. So I'm not sure that I would personally use that on a regular basis just because I feel like I'm too klutzy. But that's all on the base bezel. I'm going to pickle it for a few moments. He is not a fan of pickling frequently. He pickles as little as possible. And also of note in this chapter of the book is his take on filing, which is that you file at the last possible minute. Oh, sorry, the bezel was out of frame. I will be better about that on the inside. So people are allowed, when I'm on the bench, I can't actually see the chat coming up. So feel free to actually unmute and tell me what I'm doing, that if it's out of frame and things like that, or else I won't be able to correct in the moment. John's take on filing is leave everything to the last minute. This was one of the earliest game changers in my path towards metalsmithing, because if you're like me and early on you started out soldering the heck out of things and too much time on the torch and you got divots in your seam lines, the waiting till the last possible moment means that there's solder that can reflow instead of flowing away. So that divot that you get in your seam is often caused by it remelting. And so his idea is you only get rid of the solder that you're not going to be able to reach at a later stage of the game. And that's one of the points he makes. I think it's in that chapter. Double check that I'm talking the right step, because we're about to sand and file this first bezel wall once it's clean from the pickle. So I'm not grubbing up my files. Yeah, I don't know where he talks about it. It's further down. Yeah, on page 2. No, that's about setting up for the filing, for the cutting, turning the torch on. One of the reasons he likes that holding multiple things is because you don't have to turn the torch off. I've sort of come to the point where I say, if you need to turn the torch off, yes, you may be wasting time, but if it keeps you in more control, more power to you. So quenched and pickled, and so the removal, there we go, it's on page 44 towards the top. If any solder flowed through the seam is where it starts. So emphasizing that you're only doing that cleanup when it is not when it's not going to be possible later on. Let me pop that out of the pickle. Going to catch my breath for a second while I pull that out of the pickle. Yeah, this, for those of you that want to do stuff at the bench while we're doing this, now would be a good time to do a little bit of work prepping that. I'm going to do a quick filing and then sanding of this piece. If I can find it in my pickle. There it goes. So I have my intentionally small bezel that I've shaped for just a basic bezel wall. We'll see how intentionally small it is. Yeah, it's definitely small. So the next step is to clean the seam a little bit on the interior. So I've got a sloppy seam. The exterior I will be able to get at a later time. I'm using my favorite, a crossing file, and just doing a quick cleanup.
Can you tell us why that file is your favorite?
Sure. Yeah, the crossing file has a profile that follows curves better than most half round files. Half rounds tend to have a little bit sharper curve, whereas crossing files have a low dome and then a slightly deeper dome. So any interior curves It just follows better. I use it for interior curves, and then if I'm trying to do a very light touchdown on an outer curve, because the profile, the touchdown profile, if say you're working on the outside of a ring band here, it touches so specifically where you're trying to file that it doesn't take away lots of other material around it accidentally. So if I'm doing just the inner part of an inside curve, I like that I can choose the side that follows that curve well. It's just, I just find I have more control with it. I also vaguely recall, yep, sorry, go ahead.
I just said thank
Oh,
I just
yes.
said-
Sorry, time delay. You're welcome. What else do I feel? Oh, yeah, I vaguely feel that crossing files may be bidirectional cuts. I can't remember whether that's true or not. If anybody knows for sure, pipe up. So yeah, I'm finding in this particular curve, the deeper line is doing me in better stead. And I would normally go from here to just sanding one side of the bezel, but John's directions have us cleaning up both sides. So I'm going to pull over the lovely little multi-part sander that I've built per his directions to put it down on plexi. This is another variation for me. I tend to do most of my filing on sandpaper on top of a folded up paper towel because I find that I'm very wobbly. Oh, I've missed a step. I need to re-round it first on my mandrel. So I'm doing a little bit of light hammering before I use that. He reminds us to flip anything that we're doing so that we're not stretching it at the angle of the bezel, I mean, at the angle of the mandrel. And again, he does a wet file, a wet sand rather than downside of the giant board is it's a giant board. So just a basic cleanup for flush. I'm going to put down a bit of Sharpie marker so that I can actually see if I've got a clean fit on this. Pretty clean. All right, and then I'm going to actually check my size because I realized that, oops, I may not have made this big enough. In fact, I did not. So the two sets of pliers that you can use for this sizing up that he recommends there are either your round flat or your half round and flat. I tend to go to the half round and flat myself because it doesn't put so much mark on the far side, but it doesn't squeeze as much. So this is curved, whichever curved component you're using on the inside. And then we're squeezing.
Can you show us the bezel not fitting?
Oh, sure.
From a
doesn't-
different angle, we could,
Oh, sure. So something black to look at behind it. So it doesn't fit setting and it doesn't fit widthwise. So I've got I'm probably have to size it up about 1 millimeter. Is that showing enough?
yes, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. This is nice and easy of a task on a 24 gauge bezel. I don't have the strength to do it when I make a mistake on an 18 gauge bezel. because it takes a lot of hand strength. But on these thinner bezels, it goes fast. So like 4 squishes. And then the important part he points out is to flip your bezel over and squeeze from the other side, because we're using pliers that have an angle in. So just match your 4 points that you've done and check it before going any further. Need to go a little bit bigger. So, and if the half round version isn't doing the trick, you move up to the round flat, which will just move it a lot faster, but you got to be careful because it may move it too fast. Super close, but not quite there. One thing I realized in reading through this section was that I am less cautious than I should be about keeping my fit really, really snug. I tend to be a little loosey-goosey on it, which isn't good for the stone over time. You know, it can wobble its way out. But I know I'm not as precise as I should be. So this is about making it just fit. Since many of us have made this kind of bezel, I felt like I questioned, should I just skip this exercise? But since I committed to do the whole thing, it's really, for me, it's about doing the steps the way that John would do them instead of the way that I would, for compare and contrast. Totally up to you guys if you want to do every stone setting that I do or not. As we get to the shoulder bezels, I'm going to be doing all the shape variations that he does. So close and yet so far away. Basically, I'm going to go down every rabbit hole he has except for a few where there's just a drawing. So plan accordingly if you want to do some or all or what have you. And again, your own pace. So if you want to work ever so slightly behind and just bring what you're doing to the next session to talk about, that's great. Or if you want to try doing as I do at your own bench. Another important note he made that I haven't been doing when I do this kind of a stretch is he anneals after this. I'm almost there, so I'm going to actually anneal now because we're hardening it by stretching it with the steel. To just give it a quick anneal before we do our final fitting. And I have to do some more sanding on this now. Big anneal, because it's a tiny little piece. One of my favorite early John isms from his class is when talking about bezels, talking about mandrels, not specific to bezel making. He says, anything that you can wrap around is a mandrel, except your sewer line. I didn't want to know how he knew that the sewer line was not a good choice.
We're still looking at your fire block, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. So I've just annealed a little bit and I'm going to stretch a smidge further. Get my hand workout in for the day. So while I'm working on this, are there any settings that people are particularly dreading because they've had challenges with them? Let's see, I see questions up there. Wet sanding. So the sandpaper is damp. Yeah, it's just dipping your piece in water, but you need to make sure that the sandpaper you're getting is wet, dry sandpaper instead of just plain old, cheapo wood paper. Channel setting, yeah, channel setting. So remember that his book does not go into true channel setting. It goes into what he calls a faux channel set. So we're only learning the creating of your own channel and sliding things in instead of the precise cutting of each seat for a true channel setting. Did I miss other questions? A few freezes. I'm afraid that the freezes on the screen are probably network here. We get a lot of rain in Portland, so it may just be weather related. Any other questions that I missed? Oh, back to the hold. So in this chapter, the one that freaks me out most is emerald cut rather, step settings. And I was super excited to discover that there was a specific little tiny hint that John gives to sizing those, that when we get to that chapter will make all the difference in the world. All right, we're almost there.
I have a couple of chalcedony stones that I got from Columbia Gems here in Portland. This is Madeline, by the way. Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Howdy.
And they have a facet around the lower edge, like on the underside of the stone, as well as the top side, which I didn't realize when I purchased them. So I've never known quite how to set them.
Huh. Meaning that they've got, they're double-sided?
Yeah, they're
Or-
beveled on both sides.
Huh. Does it still have a decent girdle?
There's a little bit there, yeah.
Yeah, so a step bezel might do the trick. There we go. We're getting right to that snug. Okay, so is that visible? How snugly it fits? Ooh, I've got to do the test because it doesn't fit the same from both sides. So I did not evenly size 1/2 of the piece. So the flipping it back and forth part is critical, because otherwise you end up with a bezel that starts to do this. He's got some really great drawings in there about what doesn't work and what does work. So I managed to size it so that I can put the stone in from behind, but not from the top. And that's even more important. There we go. Now I can put it in from both, in and out. Okay, so I've now got a stone setting that fits in 24 gauge. I wish. If somebody wants to send me some 24 karat, I'll work in gold. I'm going to finish my sanding because I've now put a little bit of a ripple into things just by doing all of that pinching. The other one that I look forward to is card setting, because that's something that I very rarely see people doing. And it also takes a lot of precision, but it's such a neat look to sort of make a little like throne for the stone. So I think that's in chapter 6, maybe, if I'm remembering ahead. Okay, so I now have, let me check the book of John to make sure that I have not missed any steps that he would have done. So I've done my stretching, so it now fits. I've done my flattening. He uses a file if you need to do major takedown of material. Let's see, perfectly flat. We've got that on the wet sandpaper. So John likes to size the stone size the setting at this point if there's any place that you need to trim it back. I think we got a pretty good fit here, so I don't have any real trim to do. When we switch to doing the heavier gauge, we're going to do a final angling step. But this one is, in my opinion, is ready to solder down. We come to the first challenge that counters what I have grown up doing, which is John uses hard solder for all the steps. And then he puts it down with easy solder to attach it to whatever he's attaching it to. Hard solder, then hard solder, that's a challenging thing. If you can't make it happen, hard solder to medium solder, in my opinion, is still an okay thing, because it takes some practice to not reopen your seam. Where did I put down my 24 gauge? So somewhere. I think I'm just going to use a piece of 22 gauge as my base. I'm just going to cut off a snippet, make sure it's flat. The 24 gauge, so he talks a lot about trimming away the back plate to a certain extent. 24 gauge gets a little flimsy if you've got a big stone. So going with a heavier gauge for your back plate might give you more opportunity. Just flattening my back plate. Making sure I got a clean fit. Looks good. We're going to switch back to the bench. The juggling of the book with my usual routines is an intriguing one. Bit of a challenge. Okay, then cabochon, bezel, and prong settings. So cabs is awesome for a starting point for most of these settings. Even prong set can be set in most of the, even cabochons can even be set in most of the prong settings. Yep.
The bezel's out of, and the fire brick is out of focus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Better?
Yep.
Good, good. So for those of you that don't have stones yet and are just starting to play around with faceted, I highly recommend that you go either to Rio or I think Leslie suggested earlier, Statura, any place that you know does a good job of giving you well-calibrated stones that are consistent, and get yourselves batches of them. When I'm teaching faceted setting for the first time, I usually have my students go and buy batches of the CZs that Rio sells. Because they're consistent, it gives you some vibrant colors to play with. They're fairly durable, and they're inexpensive. That's the most important part when you're first practicing with that kind of setting. If people care, what I'm using is an acetylene air torch. Again, I'm using a combination of a Prips flux and a paste flux. Just heating off my flux. So in this section of the book, John talks about the different positions he uses for putting down solder. And actually, I'm going to flip back to the book for a second because there's a great drawing that he's done on soldering down, which is on page. Did a nice drawing where he shows us all the solder bits laid out with the interior versions and the exterior versions. Page. Page 48 in the hardcover, in which he shows the different positions that he puts down solder, whether it's an interior position or an exterior position. And I tend to teach putting it on the inside, but that's mostly because it's, unless you're using a translucent stone, that's going to be hidden away. So I'd rather have my exterior neat. But his point is that if you know you're cutting everything away and filing and cleaning, you can put it on the outside and then it keeps your interior clean. If I were working with a really transparent stone, I'd probably do that. And I'm using small chips of hard solder, or small beads if that's what I've got, because I managed to hit them with the torch, and positioning them around the inside wall in this case. For my taste, I tend to put them like a fingernail's width apart from the wall if I'm shaky on being able to keep my heat off the wall, just because that gives me, rather than it flowing up the side, it gives me that microsecond that I need to get it flowing under. And John talks a little bit about capillary action in this chapter of the book, which is critical to this. And the idea that heat is the important part, not heat from the flame, but heat on the metal. Solder follows the heat. And that does not mean solder follows the torch. Solder follows the metal at its hottest. So you're focusing on getting where you want the metal to flow the hottest. I'm going to use a moderate sized torch on this. And I'm going to heat the back plate. I'm trying to avoid putting any heat directly on top. Stray bit of solder. And this is all hard solder, so I gotta avoid my seam.
Rachel, one person had a good suggestion about, have you ever balled your solder?
I do by action of that. I pick it up often on a pick, so it balls for me as I do that. Chip solder, ball solder, wire solder, whatever works for you is my take. Except I've got such small pieces that I'm not getting flow action. So yes, balled up is totally fine. You know, anything that works is totally fine. I'm trying to go with what John's written in the book. I tend to use wire solder. There we go. Way too much solder now, Rachel. And checking that it's all the way around. Good.
Rachel, that's exactly what I just typed in. I prefer wire solder because then you could just touch down and take advantage of that capillary action.
Oh, so you're doing stick soldering then with the wire, a long wire?
Yeah. In a tube, like I have a handle for it.
Yeah, I tend to avoid that as a personal practice, except when I'm doing really big objects like large hollow forms, because it's harder to control how much solder you put down.
True, very true.
So I put that back in the pickle. I'm going to pause here and see what else we got for questions. You were told Flow Studio for setting tools. Oh, cool. There's a company called Flow Studio. What faceted stone size should I get? So the bigger the setting, the bigger the stone, the easier it is to set for certain settings until you get too big, which is a weird way of describing it. Like a prong setting, 6 to 8 millimeters is probably gives you enough grip and handle and control and visibility and not having too snug of a setting, your first settings out. But I wouldn't go bigger than like 14. I'm using big stones specifically because they'll show better on screen. Just don't get super tiny for the prong setting, but it's going to depend on what project you're working on. When we get to channel setting and so on, I think John has some notes in the book about the biggest size that's very effective with that. So, and a variety, but calibrated is the important part if you haven't done a lot of them. What else we got? Faceted stones. Oh, I missed some questions up higher. Hang on a sec. Oh, double rose cut. Yep, that's good. Somebody was interested in the channel and tension settings. Yeah, tension settings is exciting to me. I've only done a couple of tension settings. Let's see, cabochons. Yeah, capillary action, man. It's the jam. Once you realize that solder flows to the line, and when you're first starting out, your brain goes, oh, there's a hot thing and it's making the stuff melt. When your hindbrain kicks in and understands when that flow is happening, and you start getting the idea of capillary action and how a good clean seam plus knowing where to get the metal hot, not necessarily where the torch is pointing, those two things add up to magic and change your soldering world. Have I tried balling my solder? Yes, I occasionally ball the solder. Wire solder so the wire solder touchdown is the for getting that full capillary action is an act of a stick of solder, and therefore potentially if you're over hot and you don't understand the control level you need, you can flood your area with solder. But for certain projects, I find it's phenomenal. So I do all of the above. The only thing I don't use on a regular basis is paste solder. So otherwise it's jam out with whatever works for you. And I'm personally trying to do as much as John, the way that John does it. That may not be your paths through this project. So do what works for you guys. Yeah, take out of this project what you want. So how many, do I have a list from this? Do I have answers on the poll about how many people are playing along at home? Let me see what the poll is saying. I can't see the poll until it ends, apparently. So, oh, there we go. It's just that my Zoom is being iffy. Come on, scroll down for me. So we've got a few of you are wanting to work through the whole book, which is awesome. And then a lot of folks are picking and choosing specific settings, and a small portion are just watching. All good, again, and if you change your mind, I'm not committing you to whatever you put in the poll. But if there are side tracks that you see I'm not doing in the book and you want me to try them, let me know. I'm open. Think of me as sort of a docent who's trying to guide us through the book. Hands-on stuff. Any questions? Are people trying a basic bezel setting from the get-go? Anybody? Okay. After this, I welcome emails from you all if there are things that you think I could be doing differently. I am working through chapter 3. Chapter 3 is going to be a big time chunk of this. It's not a well-balanced book in terms of projects. So I think there's like 14 settings that we're going to be covering in chapter 3. But the later chapters get harder. There are fewer settings, but each of the settings is more challenging. So yeah, I'm going to pull that setting out of the pickle. Hopefully a couple minutes in a hot pickle has done it. Let's see. And if our numbers keep this size for attendance, then we may be able to be a little bit more open and just mostly keep on mic, you know, pop on, and I don't need questions to all be in text. So chapter 3 is going to give us the large array of bezel settings. So 2 choices, by the way. I'm doing stuff without showing you. I apologize. Let me switch back. In this case, I'm cutting away material with shears because it's thin enough. You could also saw away. I don't think he actually talks much about what he uses for trimming, other than to say earlier on that he uses shears for anything 20 gauge and under. So I'm just rough trimming it, taking a look at my solder. I managed to do a hard solder, but it looks to me like I may have opened up the seam and reflowed it a bit because it's sort of off kilter. So I'm going to see if I did so enough that the stone doesn't fit. Nope, we're still good. That'll fit in. I may need to do a little interior cleanup. And he talks about not ever liking to leave a solid back. So he trims away either a decorative component or all but a small ledge around the outer edge. And so I'm going to do that trim back. That trim out. I'm going to put a punch as a mark for my drill point. I'm going to take a small drill bit, if I can figure out where I left my drill bits.
Can I ask a question while you're prepping your
Absolutely.
drill?
I encourage it. Frankly, guys, the thing that's freaking me out about this is when I'm teaching small classes and this isn't supposed to entirely be straight up teaching, is not hearing the feedback. So ask questions on mic, please.
Yeah, it's very hard just to talk to yourself.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I always struggle with when it's not a necessity, but it is either a decorative element or potentially an element for cleaning behind the stone, is that what you're doing right now.
Yep.
So sometimes it feels to me as though if there's transparency or translucency in the stone, that the potential for getting dirt in some kind of decorative element in the backplate is really high, and it winds up being a problem for the person who's wearing it, who doesn't have the ability to clean it as well as one of us could. And so I'm wondering what his reasoning is, and I didn't read through the part of the book that discusses that, so he may have just explained it and I'm not re-asking, but what is his reasoning for never keeping the back fully closed?
He's broadly saying that it's so that it can be cleaned, so that there's access, because when it's completely closed, you're never getting a perfect seal. In fact, to my deep chagrin, one stone setting he talks about, he actually recommends putting a glue to make a seal. When we get to, we're going to do it, I think it's the end of this chapter, when we get to the cup bezel setting, which is taking a dapped dome and setting a stone into it. He actually uses a silicone or epoxy seal to keep water from getting into that one, which I was like, oh my God, that sounds sacrilegious to me. And I'd never caught that was his recommendation. I don't think I've ever actually done that setting. So he's telling us I cut away so that I can clean. I guess his assumption is if it's a good quality piece of jewelry, they're going to take it to get professionally cleaned or have their own steam cleaner or whatever. Yeah. Are there people who are more bench jewelry than me? Alan, you got any opinions on that one if you're still out there? Any other folks that have strong thoughts on cutting away backs?
I do. I think with some transparent stones, the cutaway on the back would be distracting if you can see it.
Because it would create a shadow of some kind?
Because it would create a shadow or a design, and you would have to think through how your piercing is affecting what the viewer sees through the stone.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I tend to do my cutaways on agates because I then try to follow the agate pattern.
I mean, if you cut away the entire circumference of the stone or the shape of the stone so that you're just leaving a tiny seat edge, then you don't have that same shadowing as much as you would if you cut a design in, but it's still, it does alter the way that the stone shows, for sure.
Yep.
So,
Anybody
but
else?
you can totally use that to your advantage as a design element. There's a woman named Cabrina Channing on Instagram who does stuff with transparent stones and some of the most extraordinary cutaway stuff I've ever seen. And it's gorgeous. It just becomes part of the design. So I'm not positive it's an either or thing. I think you just have to take it into consideration.
Yeah.
Although, again, always keeping the form function thing, because if you're putting that setting in a place that's really hard to get to clean, maybe you're right, Maya, that it's not as advisable for certain settings.
Right. I mean, I when I was much younger, I worked for one of the big jewelry companies, and they used shockingly epoxy to seal in some of the stones in their more fashion jewelry as opposed to high jewelry lines, and it was weird.
Huh.
Not I would ever want to do in my own work.
Yeah.
Name names, but yeah.
Okay, so any other questions? I see a couple other posts I didn't catch. Let's see. We've got people watching, working on. Oh, it looks like I've caught up on questions. Yeah, I don't do a lot of cutaways, but I'm trying to, play along with the recommendations and see what it gets me. I think I'm a lazy jeweler. If it's something I don't have to do, that's a horrible thing to admit, but there are certain tasks that I'm like, yeah, that's one more step, and is it going to add? But at the same time, I really appreciate somebody who's done beautiful cutaways. I just know that my nature I'm not meticulous enough in my practice to do them spectacularly well. So I have to really make the choice to do that.
Right.
So gang, just so you can see what I've been doing when I thought I was on camera, but I wasn't, is I blackened the bottom of it, drilled a hole and marked an approximation of the round that I want to cut away. And I have to switch out of glasses because I can't see worth a damn that close. Into my goggles.
You need to change cameras, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. I thought I had done that. So I'm using a wax, or I'm using a burlife, or I'm using spit. I know that's kind of gross, but it's actually one of the better. I don't have my bench pin set up the way I like it right now. What I get for starting a fresh cut. I'm totally not set up for the right position of this. So spit is actually a better lubricant than most other things. When I was teaching at Brookfield, I had it, or when I was taking classes at Brookfield before I started teaching there. What is going on with this blade? Did I put it in back? I put it in backwards. That's what I get for talking while I'm trying to put a blade in. Put it in upside down. There was a wonderful crazy woman teaching at Brookfield when I first started back up there, who really believed in the power of her dog's spittle to help her jewelry practice, among other things. But the problem is that when you're working in a shared studio, you really don't want to be putting it down on the saw blades. So as gross as it is a good lubricant if you got nothing else. And John references circumstances where he uses it as well. I think on the graver settings. There's the time when you get on screen and you're cutting the worst cut line of your entire life because you're on screen. That's how it works.
I'm pretty sure that's a prerequisite for this sort of thing. You have to do your work.
Yeah, there is no judgment at all.
But what it means, sadly, is there's just that much more filing that I'll have to do. Wow, that's pretty sad. So conceptually, I've accomplished the task of cutting out the back plate. Practically speaking, it's pretty ugly and I'll have a lot of cleanup to do. So and now I can safely put my stone in to make sure that it still fits the setting. It does, in fact, still fit the setting. So at this point, I'm going to do a lot of sanding and filing to get it to a fairly clean finish. And this is where I need an opinion from the team of folks that are watching, which is, do you want to literally watch me file, or do you want to take, sand and file and do all the finishing steps as well? Or do you want that to be off board and I come back and show you a sanded project or some mix thereof?
I'm kind of working along, so I don't mind you doing the filing and I'm filing at the same time.
Okay.
Just for my opinion.
That's my opinion also.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say go ahead and do it.
Do it. All right. So then.
And I especially like how John, I'd love to see how John, does the finishing touches on setting the stone.
So setting, as you may have missed it at the beginning.
Oh, I'm
setting,
sorry.
I'm going to delay a little bit in the sequence of events because I'm personally working on a sampler style where I want to make several settings for the same stone and then pick the setting that I think I want to land it in, and I'll set them a little further down. So I'll probably have like a round of setting things at the end of the chapter 3 projects. But I'll play that by ear depending on how many settings we've got. Also, this is something that's not in the book, but which John taught us when we were doing, when we were working on star setting, I think, if you are trying to do this as a sampler, I'm not at my face like I thought I was. There we go. If you're trying to do a sampler plate just to test and practice, and you want something to grip it with for setting, make your back plate with a T that you solder on. So like take a little tab of others of silver, of heavyweight silver, or a piece of brass or something, and solder it solidly on so that you get a little tab that you can then hold in either a ring clamp or in your vise or something like that to give you more grip when you're setting. So if it's not going into a project and you're doing it as just a sampler piece, that gives you some meat to hold on to. So, okay, so I'm going to file and sand unless there are other questions. I'm not seeing others. Right, so I'm going to be trimming even more away because I can with my shears. And then I'll get to filing and sanding. My go-to file for this kind of sanding is my barrette file. If I were on a deserted island and could only pick 2 files to have with me, it would be a barrette file and a crossing file. Except I got to use the one that's going to actually have some oomph behind it. I am not showing the right bench pin. Again, we wouldn't be doing this level of filing if we were doing anything else that would still let us do the filing at a later date. One of the most frustrating things that John would always tell us when people asked about how his work, how to avoid having to do so much filing, was he would say, if you don't want the marks on there, don't put them on there to begin with. Do you think, John, you think we could have just avoid making the marks altogether? Then we wouldn't have to file.
Yeah, Charles says that too. It's not very helpful.
It's
Charles,
not
how
at
do
all.
how do you deal with that scratch, Charles? Well, you don't put it in the metal to begin with. Well, thanks for that.
So I'm working primarily on filing the base plate flush with the walls. When we move on to the next settings, which are the step bezel or the shoulder bezels, I'm going to constantly call them step bezels. I apologize in advance, guys. The being able to solder to the point where you can't see your seams is super, super critical in those for a nice finished look, especially getting the inner and outer layers of them clean. He doesn't go into a lot of detail in the book, but there's some drawings of variations that you can do with even these basic bezels, where you're just filing away sections or sawing and filing away sections to make some really neat variations. With just simple cutaways, or in the heavier gauge bezels, you can put some cancellation on them. So, you know, like literal curves and prongs and so on, sort of, just by filing. So if you're looking for something fancier, even in the most basic bezel, I think there's a reason he put so much into chapter 3, which is that a lot of bezels are done in one of the styles in this chapter. A habit I wish I could personally break is the finger forward, but I learned it too young, so I can't stop myself enough. It's just not very healthy for carpal tunnel issues and so on.
It's so interesting. That's exactly how I learned it, and how you're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to. It's what many of us grew up with, and it feels like it's more in control, but it's pushing that muscle group in ways that it really shouldn't. Same with the hammering. Sorry, say again.
So is there a specific grip that is recommended, and how do you control
That's the problem. I learned it's so innate now. If anybody has tips for folks on how to better file while controlling.
So, you know, because I've heard that both ways, and I've heard that that's actually a myth.
Really?
So, yeah, because yeah. So I don't know. I would love to speak to somebody who is like in the physical therapy field and find out, which I have not done. Has anybody here done any independent research on it, or is that one of those things that's just kind of accepted truth now?
I accept that my doctor tells me I have carpal tunnel, so that's the problem. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. It may not be caused by this. It, like when I'm hammering and I'm doing that, I can tell, I can feel it. So if I'm supported with the pistol grip style, and that I can actually feel the muscle doing the work that it shouldn't be. So that one I've managed to get to the point where it feels better, but no, I don't know. That's not a bad call to ask. Oops. I need my crossing file again, which I can find somewhere. And not a John lesson, but Joy Raskin taught me to use the biggest file that you can control, which is a really good way of putting it. So you're using the most tool that will take away the most material while you can still manage it. Instead of always going to your needle file, if there's room to be working with a larger piece, I mean a larger tool, do so. So as a reminder, between our roughly 2 weeks apart sessions, 2 weeks when it's 2 times a month, it's not quite every 2 weeks. If you want to have discussions or you want to post photos of progress and so on, that Facebook group is out there. You're also welcome to email me questions, but I'll warn you, because I have the dual career going on, my time is limited and it may take me a few days to answer. But also my first recommendation before you ask me a question is go to the book. Go to the book. He does a lot of great describing. Take really close note of the drawings he's done. If you haven't managed to take a John class, he gets really upset if a school doesn't have an actual old school chalkboard for him, because his drawing skills are such that the drawings he comes up with while he's teaching are spectacular on a chalkboard and sort of get dumbed down on a whiteboard. So he's a big fan of hand taking notes, and he puts massive piles of notes and drawings up on the board as the start of each cycle of project. And it's part of why that's one of the things I'm working on, is getting more meticulous with my drawings. It was a bit of a ramble there, but just having good memories of taking classes with him. So I'm just broadly, oh, that's not clean enough. I'm just broadly filing material away, trying to leave enough of a lip that the stone will still hold. But if you're doing one where you're cutting the full material away, it's not a bad exercise to see how little you can get away with. I've got way more material still on this thing than I need to have. So he gave us a good measurement in the book if somebody wants to call it out if you're on those pages. Stone in really snug on this one. And the filing is going to put a bit of a lip on there, so I need to blunt the back. If I were finishing this for a production piece, I would probably personally be finishing my filing, following my filing by putting it on a Tripoli or Gray Star, a cutting compound wheel of some kind. Anybody else have favorite things that they do for getting a finished, clean, comfort edge instead of the sharp file edge? Anyone?
I've seen a lot of people using that pipe burr thing that you can get at Home Depot.
Oh,
That's
yeah, those are great. The deburring, I use a deburring tool. I didn't think about using that on a bezel. That's a good call.
Yep.
So if you don't have one of these, this is a cheap and fun tool for finishing the edge of the interior comfort fit on rings, and it just spins and has a super sharp edge. I'm going to try that since you've reminded me that I have one. See what it does. Oh yeah, it's a little snug of a fit, but finishes nicely. You're not going to necessarily be able to get, well, maybe both sides.
I've never seen one of those in actions. That's very cool.
Yeah, they're super fabulous. A little too easy to cut with on silver, so it's easy to take more away than you realize. But it's just skimming down. Yeah, that's a good call, Jessica. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I still don't have a neat finish on my piece because I haven't done a very good job of making a circle. But I'm getting closer. And John doesn't actually talk a whole lot about how he does detailed finishing. I realize that all the classes I've taken with him are about getting through a technique, so we don't do a lot of finishing in class. In fact, you're often fortunate that you've even come close to finishing the project. So I know that while he does jewelry work, his primary focus through the years has been on object making. And so he uses ginormous buffs for a lot of his projects. But other than that, I haven't actually talked much with him about his finishing techniques. He does believe primarily in leaving things a satin finish whenever possible. The only thing he actively polishes up are the interiors of chalices that he makes, because silver wants to return to that satin state. So, that's why it tarnishes and fades and so on. Not making that curve still.
Do you know what his preferred method is for achieving a satin finish?
Honestly, I don't. I just know that he's talked about it because it doesn't hold fingerprints as much as a high polish. So when he's making, the only time I've really heard him talk about it is when he's talking about a chalice that he makes, which he does a lot of religious chalices. And because they're often held as part of the ceremony, he doesn't want fingerprints on the outside, but he wants the glow of the wine. So he'll high polish or even gold finish the interiors of them. But I don't know what tools he uses for it. Time 6:30. Okay. So I'm going to go with my usual finishing techniques for this a little bit, and I'm going to use our sandpaper board that I've managed to put down. And I'm just going to work my way through the grits. Trying not to thin things out too much. I also realized that when I did the hard solder, it did shift my seam a little bit. So I've got a little tiny lip that I need to take down. Has anybody else who's taken a John class gotten to do any finishing of work with him? I know you're out there.
In the comments in the chat, Barbara says that she says brass brush is what he uses for satin finishing.
Oh, for his satin finish? Huh. Just a brass brush? Goodness. There's got to be something before you get to the, it's okay to just wrap everything in a brass brush, isn't there? Oh no, he doesn't make marks on his pieces, so maybe there isn't for John.
Brass brush can take down a lot of texture.
Yeah.
Sterling, not on gold, but on sterling it can, yeah, can do a number. That's what we learned in school.
Nice.
That's like 400 and then brass brush.
Are we talking about those soft hand brass brushes?
Yeah. One of
That's what I was talking about.
yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
So he does brass brushing after almost every phase, especially pickling. And if you guys haven't treated yourself to the ones that Tevel sells with the plastic handles instead of the rotting wood handles,
Oh,
wonderful. So I'm just doing sanding all the way around the outside of the bezel, try and get a nice, clean, even finish. And I'm doing it with a bit of a torque as I go to follow the curve. Okay, somebody needs to write a book about finishing techniques, please. And if any of my fellow teachers out there want to put together a class exclusively on how to use measuring tools in the context of jewelry making, I would sign up tomorrow. Like how to get better at using your measuring tools accurately and well.
I don't know about anybody else, but for me, it's about putting on magnifying glasses so I can read it.
Yeah, this getting old crap ain't for sissies, man.
Yep. Okay, so I'm on to the 400. Oops, I haven't been doing wet though, so that may make a difference. I'm now moving on to 600. I don't know if you guys can see the sort of level of finish it's getting. And what I like about this pre-measuring that he does is I don't think I have a lot of trimming down to do. I could pretty much set this once I'm happy with the finish. I feel like that 3.5 measurement gave me a little bit more overage than I would normally cut when I'm not measuring, but just wrapping. But that's not a bad thing. Can I tell us how I made the sanding board? It is literally a piece of plexiglass. It's about a quarter of an inch thick. And I used painter's tape and taped down strips of varying heavinesses of varying grits of sandpaper. The board I happen to have because it's one that I use in my display setup when I'm at shows, and it just happened to get grubby enough that I thought I could repurpose it. But if you have a local Taps plastic or something, they may even have scrap that they'll sell you for like $5 or less. It's super cheap. And I like that it's giving me a nice consistently flat surface. Right, so 600 on the sides, a bit more water. moving on to the 1,000. And frankly, when I'm working on a curve on 1,000 grit, I'm gonna move over usually to these nail file pads that you can get these days, which come in grits up to 1,000 and 4,000 grit even. And the delightful thing is that they follow the curve of the material. They are amazing in how quickly they polish. And if you use them on gold, it's almost not needing to polish when you get to the 4,000 grit. So I'm just using my, I think this is the 4,000 side. I never remember which one is the 4,000 side when I have them. That must be the 4,000 and that's the finished polish. So I'm using the 1,000 first and then the 4,000. Because it's easier than controlling it on a board when it's tiny stuff like this, because I can follow that curve. So rinse this off. So that's where we are, just using up to the 1,000 grit for finish. Oh, is that showing to you guys enough? There we go.
It's a little out of focus. I don't know if it's possible to focus more.
Let me see if I go over to my more focusable camera.
Yeah, if you pull back towards the soldering block, then we'll be able to see it sharper. Yeah.
So it's sort of a satin-ish, but not even, there's not really striping on it, or not sure if that's showing or not. That's before I hit it with the 4,000. And then I'm going to go back and work on the 4,000 and finish up just half of it. So don't know if the bling is showing now with the 4. Let's see what I can see with my own camera screen showing me. So that's the side that I've hit with the 4,000. See how it's got its sparkle already? And this is the half that's still on the 1,000. All for some nail files. So I'm going to finish polishing this one up. Any questions?
I'd love to have a link for this nail file, guys.
Pardon?
I'd love a link or where you bought the nail file thing.
So there's many manufacturers. I'm standing up to see if I can find my brand. The brand that I've gotten is called Shiner. I have an Amazon link for it probably somewhere, but I'm very particular about them. I've tried like 4 different brands and only these ones that are the green and white specific, this mixture works for me. There are others that are and have different, like they have multiple grits, but these are the ones that I really love.
The Shiner brand is pretty terrific and you can get them. They're not expensive on Amazon.
Just be aware that they sell them with multiple grits and then they sell them in specialty clusters. The only one that I bother with personally, I don't know about you, Francesca, but I only bother with the 1,000, 4,000 on these as a finishing tool. The rest gets shredded so quickly.
I'll be honest with you, I have not looked at the grit. I just know that what I use is their, I think they call it their shining buff. So it's meant for the sort of the later stages of nail finishing.
Yeah. And boy, what it does to silver is nice, but what it does to gold, amazing. So any other questions out there? Oh, what did I start with and end with on the sanding board? So I worked through my 320, my 400, my 600, and then moving to 1,000 is when it starts to hit this. So I could have done it there as well. I just didn't have a 4,000 sandpaper. You can get them, but I've bought the high micron, tiny sandpaper, and I don't find that the cost of it makes it worth it when there are these magical things out there. But other people, your mileage may vary. You know, the tools that work for me aren't the tools that work for everyone. Any other questions? So I am, other than feeling like I really need to fix my not perfectly round interior hole, I'm gonna call this, for the sake of tonight's exercise, I'm gonna call this relatively finished. I'd scrub it with soap and water and probably polish it on the wheel. And then set it in whatever project it's going in. So we used hard solder. We did, using John's techniques, we were sawing the seam to try and get a clean line, to get a clean fit. We were using hard solder not only on the seam, but on the base. My personal take on that is if you're new to soldering and that's really frustrating you because you're melting a lot, use medium solder on soldering it down to the back plate. Just don't try to avoid using easy solder in this stage of it because you need something that you can use to solder it down. And I really like his measuring techniques because it means that I don't have any excess trim I need to do on the round. Rounds are going to be much easier when we start hitting other shapes. We've got, corners and dips and things like that, that make it a little more challenging. So our first project. Yay. I'm going to move on to do the same thing for an oval. And the difference being that we use a slightly different math for it. Oops, I gotta go back to face cam. We use a slightly different math for it, and I'm going to be doing it with an 18 gauge wall. Again, you could go heavier, but this is when we start using that kind of gauge, it's not going to be about setting it by hand. It's going to be about hammer setting it. And the most important tip that he has on the heavier gauge, let me find the page number for you to reference, because it's a hidden tip. It's not really well articulated in the language so much as it is in the drawings. This was a eureka moment for me going through his materials. So on page 61, when he talks, no, sorry, not 61, page a little further on, corner settings. He talks about filing heavier gauge bezels down. And where is that drawing that I'm looking for?
This one part on 47 where he talks about creating a chamfer or a bevel on the edge. Is that what you're talking
It
about?
might be. Let me see if I get to 47, if that's what I'm thinking of.
I'm looking on
Yes, yeah. So the drawing on page, thank you, that's exactly what I was looking for. The drawing on page 47 shows an angle being filed into the heavier gauge walls. All my life, I believed that was a triangle. When you look at that image really closely, it's not a triangle. He's leaving a little top lip. That was what we're setting down with. That was like, that, but he doesn't explicitly say that as well as he could. So I highlighted in my book the section of it and made a blown up drawing of it. Are you all seeing what I'm talking about?
I don't have the book in front of me. So are you talking about that he's leaving a ledge on the top?
Yeah, so I'm gonna put it on my drawing, on my plate, on my magical whiteboard that isn't a whiteboard. Hang on. Oh, tell me I didn't actually use a Sharpie on this board. Okay, so I've all my career I've been doing this when you need to thin something, but you're not in his world. You're doing this, right? Because what we're going to be doing is hammering this down, not this in. And so that, I just want to bring that up because he does have a drawing of it, but it's an incredibly subtle drawing in the book. And that makes all the difference in the world on the heavy bezels, because otherwise we're getting our metal too thin at the most important spot where it's hitting the stone.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay, so go ahead.
Change your camera back, or are we starting this other thing now?
No, I can change it back. Were there more questions? I gotta clean up my bench a little because I've pulled every tool under the sun out thus far. So let me clear a few things before I start in on the next one. And so we're gonna get most of the way through this before our 7:30 end. But I wanna have a few minutes to talk about what is happening in the next session. So if you wanna drop off before we hit 7:30, you'll be aware. Next session, we will probably start out facing and making and facing pushing tools. So we'll make one either from a nail or from a brass rod, for which you need a crappy coarse file of some kind and a 16 penny or thereabouts nail. It can be a little bigger, a little smaller. You could also, my favorite nails for making setting tools are actually flooring nails, which are rectangular. So you already start out closer to the shape that you're making. So I buy these by the box and modify them into all kinds of setting tools. And they're great for when we get to punches. They come in 2 basic sizes and they're good steel. So if you're looking for something like that, and you don't want to go out and buy a whole box of 16 penny nails, these will have other purposes for stamping and so on. And you need the handle for it. Again, remember to get one that has the metal band around it to make your work a little safer so it doesn't all split on you. And then I'm also going to face, especially since I know there's a bunch of people that haven't done any setting, so you may have gone out and purchased a basic setting tool, a basic bezel pusher from Rio or someplace like that. As they come from the manufacturer, they're a little sharp, so I'm going to talk about treating those. So if you don't want to make your own because you already have one, I'll just talk to you about what the modification is that equates to what John talks about in the book. And then we'll go into the shoulder bezels. And I think the order of those is around, let me see, I got notes for a very specific reason so that I would know this. Next session will be an oval and then a rectangle and then a square. So I'm going to work through the shoulder bezels as they get progressively more complicated and more challenging to build. And again, you can pick and choose what you want to follow along with. I'm going to sort of figure out how much pacing it is, but I suspect it'll be 2 or 3 settings over the course of it because I won't have so much upfront talking. And then again, starting with next session, we'll leave 15 minutes at the end to let people show and tell and bring up questions to help them help all of you, whatever your next steps are. And that's, I do not intend to be the only teacher here. I hope that everyone who has experience is comfortable sharing when people have questions and giving input and being as positive as possible, knowing that we're all in different places along the journey. So that's what's going to be covered on the next topic. And looking ahead by about, I think it'll probably take us 3 or 4 sessions to get through all of chapter 3, at least. It depends on if we have some slowdowns on the more challenging ones. I personally may want to do more than 1 emerald setting because they're so challenging to me. But by the time we hit chapter 4, you will probably want to have the couple of pairs of stainless steel cross-locking tweezers and a chenier or hinge file. If y'all know what a chenier is, or chenier.
I just got a set of those. I'm so excited.
They're wonderful and magical. Where did I put my drawing board down? Oh, there it is. So for those of you that aren't sure what a chenier is, it's for hinges specifically, and they come in different sizes, but at the very minimum, you want one that fits your, that is about the size of your needle files. They have, gotta be on the right screen. They have file material at the top and the bottom, but nothing along the sides. So this is filey and this is filey. A good one is gonna have a small curve and a bigger curve, like a steep curve and a little one. And John talks in the book about using them to make the notches, to start the notches in our settings for the prong sets. They're also super handy when you're doing hinges on boxes or on lockets. That's in their intent, is to give you an easy, clean fit. And just like a barrette file doesn't have anything along the back, these don't have the sides. So you're only filing with that centerpiece. So those are the two tools that if you don't have them by the time we hit chapter 4 in another month or two, I would strongly urge you to pick up. And the stainless steel cross-locking mod that he does is magical for prong settings. Questions before I move back to doing an oval? What page is the shoulder bezel on? It starts on chapter 3, sorry, chapter 4, no, chapter 3, shoulder bezels. We're not doing shoulder bezels until next session, but it starts on, or about, where's my step bezels? Shoulder bezels starts on page 60. So that's where we'll be kicking off next session, 2 weeks from now. Again, reminder, a different link. So you need to have registered for the third Wednesdays as well. Zoom doesn't let me do a weird, just twice a month thing. Any other questions before I go back to ovals? Okay. I promise I'm gonna feel more and more awkward the more we go through this book, because these are the stone settings I'm most familiar with. Okay, back to my face, please. Back to my face. Yes, any other questions? Okay, I'm going to start working on an 18 gauge bezel. So we're going fairly heavy. You can go heavier than this, certainly, if you want something extra sturdy. But again, I haven't done a lot of this kind of setting, and I'm not confident of my hand strength. That's somebody on.
No, yeah, it's over enough. I can listen with one ear. How are you doing?
Hang on a sec. Let me mute.
Okay.
Mute.
There we
Whoever
go.
that's talking needs to mute.
I think. Hang on. My Zoom is delayed, so I'm trying to mute. Is it work? I'm not sure. Okay, so our oval stone, this one is a lapis that I picked up specifically for this project. And I do have all my notes, but I'm going to measure again because I was off a little bit on that last one. So it has a length, so it's there, 18.10 is its length. Let me bring my magical board back and put some notes down. I've got to throw that Sharpie marker out. I say 18.1. Nope, 18.35. 13.24. Okay, and so the math recommendation he does on these is that you add these together, multiply by 2, and then do, multiply by 2. Let me check, because I'm gonna, again, I don't like doing the math part. For oval, how to do this that he likes. Again, normally I would just be wrapping material around it, but when we're working with a heavier gauge, it makes sense to do it as a measurement. But he also talks a little bit about how you can just take a piece of tape and figure out your length and add enough for the material width. Just the measurements for oval. For oval stones, add the length and width of the stone, then divide by 2, then multiply by the 3.5. So this is going to be 7, 3, 31 divided by 2. So that gives us 15. 6,176, give or take, times 3.5. Ugh. This is why we have calculators in our computers these days. Let me get that. $15.66 times 3.5, 54.81. Okay, so I need a strip that is 54.81 long, and then my height on this one, oops, got to zero my machine. My height on this one is, if I don't break the stone, my height is 6.27. And he points out that on a shorter stone, I mean, on a heavier gauge, say 6.27, that we only need to go about 1/3 of the way up the stone. So we're going to go 2.1 millimeters high and give ourselves a little extra for the filing. So again, got stone wants to leap to its death. I'm blackening with some Sharpie. Get myself 2.1. I wanted a bit for the filing. I'm going to go with 2.3. Wow, that feels like a very, very short bezel to me. Let's see where this is going to go. Well, I'm gonna trust in his guidance and make this short little bezel. I'm not likely to be able to cut this gauge because it's 18 gauge with shears, but let's see. Well, maybe I am. I will always cut a straighter line with a pair of shears than I will with a saw. So if I can cut it with shears, I'm going to cut it with shears. The downside being that it curls. Again, these are some really wonderful bonsai shears. I'm not a huge, I know a lot of people use the Joyce Chens. I'm not a huge fan. They don't have enough overall strength for my taste. That's going to be some serious flattening I've got to do. And I may learn my lesson and go back and do it as a saw after all. Okay, apparently I can't cut a straight line when I'm using shears either. So I'm going to use some flat pliers. Start the straightening out. So the downside of having used the shears is it does put a curl into it in multiple directions. So I've got some cleanup work I'm going to have to do regardless. And my steel block. 6. So it looks like all told during the course of this, about half of the people that registered actually showed up, which makes me okay with if you have people that you know want to join, as long as they understand that only the first 100 people, it doesn't look like, this was the one I expected to have the most people in. So if there are other folks that you know that wanted to get on board, it's not too late. It doesn't look like everybody who registered is likely to show. My cap is at 100 people right now. And again, it's show up for 1, show up for 5, whatever you want. I think I may choose to do the same exercise with a saw to compare and contrast. 54. A sloppy cut. Okay, I'm going to also saw a band, but I need to clean up the edge that's left over from what I just did. Escapement file. Oh, did somebody, Maya, you have found a good escapement files? Oh, all the tools. Yes, got it. The escapement files were me asking if anybody had a good source of them, because I've been having a hard time finding them except in antique tools. The shellac or jet set is your choice for setting materials. I will type up and post to the Facebook group the ones that I think you need to get you through chapter 3 as foundational. It assumes you have a soldering station and so on. Getting there, right.
I've bought really beautiful, barely used escapement files frequently on eBay.
Nice.
And
Okay.
I find that their older ones are always better made.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, Grobet, but older ones are just, they tend to have much nicer cut. And
yeah.
And I always keep a search criteria there looking for them. But I've gotten sets of them, and I got a couple of them also from a machinist who was like getting rid of their stuff, and beautiful, just perfect. Like
so the majority of the files I'm using came from a watchmaker's estate. And it was a 3rd generation watchmaker who passed away with nobody to take over the business, sadly. And there were boxes of unopened files from 1923 with their original handwritten quality control label in them. I bought 1,000 files. Where's my measurements? What did I have for this? Cheat off of this.
I put a list in response to Carmen's question about what the tools you were saying we needed, but I didn't, that's just what was off the top of my head, or things that I made a note for myself on, so if anyone
Awesome.
wants to add to that, maybe we could just have a sort of running list of stuff there.
Yeah, it's sort of, I always am aware that especially people starting out want sort of minimal costs involved in this. But you know, I'm going on the assumption that you have at least basic studio equipment. If you're going from absolute ground zero, drop me an email and I'll give you some charts that I use when I'm teaching my setting up your studio class. And it gives like high priority versus low priority, or so you only have $500 to spend. Here's what I recommend.
And on that subject, I did not appreciate a good file until Rachel let me use her good files, and they're worth the price.
Yeah. Yeah, if I had to pick the thing that you should, for this project that you should spend money on, it's good files. That is definitely not a 2/0 blade in there. Okay, some skinny blades snuck in with my 2/0s, I think. No. Anybody have favorite saw blades that they swear by?
I like the Hercules blades that Rio Grande has.
Yep.
I did a blind test. I've been a laser gold user for years, but Pepe Tools has come out with new nano blades and they are the bomb.
Nice.
A bomb.
They also sell them with the sets, don't they? The Pepe's combined. This is one of the coolest new tools on the market, in my opinion. Super easy. Just be able to put, it puts all your blades in a single slot, and they just came out with one for drill bits too. That's been tempting me.
Yeah, no, but the nano blades last, just in my opinion, for what that's worth, they're the bomb.
Nice.
I'm a Hercules fan too.
Cool. Is it so? There's two different lines in the Hercules, right? Is there a Hercules Gold and?
I don't know. I've always gotten them from Guess Wine. I haven't bought them in a while because I'll just buy a gross.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite saw blade, Rachel?
Say again?
What's your favorite saw blade?
So the problem is that because I've gotten so much at garage sales, most of my stuff is old before steel quality went down, and no brand names on them. They're like paper labels and, you know, Mimeo copied stuff. And so I'm getting close to the point where I have to buy some new ones. That's why I've been asking. I default to a 2/0 for most of my starting student project work. And so I just need something good that I can give people a dozen of when I'm doing a kit for them. I know that my recollection on the Hercules is that they changed their model or their material or something at one point. They used to be really great for doing like soft steel plates when you're cutting out die cut material. Okay, I can't saw straight and talk at the same time, apparently.
Okay.
Sorry. So I haven't found a favorite in modern blade work. All right. So here's my experiment. And the answer is go slow instead of fast, Rachel. Which one do we think we'll be using? I think we'll be using the one that's not mangled. So now I've got to go back and take the 54.8 length that I was looking for before. Oh, of course, I didn't cut out enough, did I? That can't be right. I must have done math badly again. 31. There's no way that I need 54 millimeters. Either that or I've reset my scale to something. Oh, I've got it switched to inches. That's why. Much better. Using the right form of measurement helps. 4. Okay, and we are using the half round pliers, if I can figure out where I put them. There we go. Half round pliers. Yellow Dagger brand. Huh, never even heard of them. Contenti has escapement files. That's super exciting.
I'm looking at the daggers. They're made by Grove.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, they look great. Thank you for that suggestion.
All right, so I am rough shaping it. I'm so close to it. So the math is closer on this than it was on the round for some reason. Either my math was off or I don't know what. I guess we're going to find out what it takes to size up an 18 gauge bezel. This is ever so slightly too small. Okay, do a little file cleaning first, and then we'll use that saw through trick. I don't know about the rest of you, but my tension at the bench always comes from when I'm doing filey type things, where for some reason I file better when my shoulders are at my ears.
Rachel, I'm curious because I've seen you do this now several times.
Yeah.
Notice that you don't brace your left hand. It seems, or at least from where I'm
wobbly.
It seems like it's still very much up in the air.
So it is, and here's why. I have to take my glasses off if I'm going to work up close. But if I'm not taking my glasses off, then I'm like peering under them. So I'm not thinking about it. It's because I'm demoing. If I'm working at the bench and I take my glasses off properly, I do stabilize.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
No, you're right. Stabilize is good.
Okay.
The other thing that I like to point out for people who are having trouble getting straight lines filing, a lot of people grew up filing like this across their bodies. And that's because, either you're filing your nails or whatever, so you're working the file. We have a pretty natural right angle in our bodies if we just point our hands across at each other. And so positioning in such a way that you're cutting across, you can learn to give yourself a straight edge, either supporting it on something, like you were saying, resting your hands or whatever. But this gives us a much more natural, like if you're trying to get a flat and you're doing something like that or like that, you're of course going to curve at your ends just because your body's going in the wrong direction. Whereas if we're cutting across our own angle, then it's a straight stabbing motion basically, instead of an angle that gets awkward at the wrists. I hope that made sense.
Totally. Great explanation. Thank you.
So yes, thank you for pointing out. I just needed to take my glasses off. Because, you know, when you're in mid live stream, that's what you do. I finally have to get 2 pairs of glasses. One for near and one for far. That's the aging thing. So this is a decent filing cleanup, but oops, I don't need that. I need the saw. But I'm going to still do John's exercise, which again, pushing down, not squeezing, which is what I'd always done. With it firmly together, but not, you're not forcing it. So I'm sawing through to get a clean cut. Which, even if it's not a straight line, because both sides have been filed to meet, it should make sure it's matching up. May have to do a little cleanup of pushing it back and forth. There's some springiness in this. Oh, that's right. He wants us to anneal at this step, which I never think to do. So I'm going to hop back over. And I think what we will get to is we'll probably get just far enough to have this ready to go down to its back plate. Switch on this exercise. So we'll probably start by finishing this up next time.
So Rachel, you never accounted for the thickness of the metal on that. Is that correct?
I was using John's calculation math where it's accounted for in the 3.5. It's instead of being a 3.141, you know,
Yeah.
not doing
Okay.
5. So he's giving leeway by doing that, and that's why I wanted to try, even though I hate the math. And the answer is I still end up doing a little trimming on it. In this case, I trimmed a little too far. If I had been more precise with my math, perhaps I wouldn't have had to. Straighten this out a little bit, and then we'll solder it together. So there's something kind of cool about going back to the basics. You know, I've been making this kind of bezel for a very long time, but to actually have to give intent and to think about it at the minute detail level that reading through his book is making me do, grammatically correct there. That's part of what I wanted out of this exercise. It's why I started the process and then said, what the heck, let's invite 100 people along, apparently. But I would urge anybody who is riding along to really give thought to the things we do because we've always done them that way, as opposed to, you know, what can we nuance in our process. I'm again using hard solder. Am I on the right torch? I am on the right screen. And this time I'm remembering that he encourages us to heat the back side, which, as a reminder, closes the gap a little further for you more firmly by heating away from the actual seam line. If your seams are opening up, it means you're soldering the front before the back. Okay. I'm just going to need a fair amount of sanding and filing. And I'm going to have to size this up a little bit, which is going to be, again, a trifle trickier because it is heavier gauge. So I don't know how well I'll be able to manage with my hand strength, but we'll see. And I'm going to do a lot of sanding and filing as my next step. Where are we for time? Yeah, I'm going to sit here and sand this clean. I don't think I'll have it oval again enough and sanded enough to put down to the back plate before we wrap. Any questions, any suggestions for next time that would help you all? Resources people want?
But can you
send out a Zoom link for us to get into the class? I barely got in today because I couldn't find where I was supposed to go to hit the Zoom. So I went to the re-registration page and it said to enter the class then. Is that how you want us to do it, or should we, I expected a link or something before.
So in order to avoid people just hopping on who have devious intent when hopping on a Zoom, I have to have you register, which means everybody gets an email link. What I can do is I think a Zoom, and Francesca, maybe you remember if this is possible, I think I can select everybody in the Zoom registration and send a refresher email before the Wednesday class saying, here's your link, don't forget it. And that sends it to individual links. So
Yes, I think
I'll
you
do
can.
that.
The other thing is when you get an email, guys, when you register, you will get an email confirmation from Zoom. Yeah, there is an option there to add the meetings to your calendar, and that will include the link for you automatically. I strongly encourage you to do that.
Nice.
Then it's on your calendar and you can just click straight through from the appointment. The other thing I would say, I sat in the wrong meeting room for 20 minutes because I forgot that there were 2 separate registrations for the first and third Wednesdays. So that would be the other thing, is to make sure that you're saving both of those emails and not just one.
Yeah.
My bad.
I kind of wonder if some of our other people did the same and gave up. So
Yeah, I know,
yeah.
I know Eva Sherman did.
Oh,
So
no.
that's okay. I tried to help her out. I was unable.
Yeah.
But so not be a bad idea to send a refresher out to just everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Any other things people need in order to prep whatever you personally want to prep for next time? Okay. Well, I'm happy to stay on for another 5 minutes, just sitting here sanding in front of you, but that's sort of what I've got, and we'll start out next time finishing the heavier gauge oval bezel and then moving on to shoulder bezels. Then we'll make do the setting tool, which should take all of about 15-20 minutes, because I'm going to cheat and use a grinder instead of just a file. If you happen to have a belt sander or a bench grinder or something, that will speed up your process, but it is possible to do by hand as well. So just remember, you want a crappy file with fairly heavy tooth. You don't want to be doing this on your good quality files.
Like a wax file?
No, because the wax, I think it'll destroy the teeth on the wax file, just like more of a wood shop style course. Yeah, big old bastard file, basically.
I was gonna say, if you get a bastard file at Home Depot, that's your best bet.
Yeah. Something to just take some steel down so it's not getting mixed up. And you may, if you have a lot of bench scraps sweeps that you tend to do, you may want to work either away from that or clean your sweeps and then clean it again. Having a good magnet around, because we're gonna be dumping off a little bit of steel scrap as part of that. And then again, either a 16 penny nail is what John uses in the book, or the variation that I use because I modify them later on for stone setting is a box of, these are just called flooring nails, and they're really cool because you can make all kinds of things on either end out of them. And I use this for a lot of my textured settings. Okie doke. Any other questions?
I do have a question. Are we gonna need gravers for setting the heavy bezel in this next session, or do I have more time to pick those up?
So because I'm not going to set until later in the process, and because he doesn't actually talk about sizing and sharpening gravers, I was thinking that I'd hold you're talking about the bright cut finish on the heavy setting?
Yeah, I haven't done that before.
Yeah.
So I was gonna actually pick up a set of gravers, or
Yeah, spend money on those. Don't get cheapo like bulk pack. I've made that mistake in the past.
Okay.
But yeah, so he's got the 3 numbers that he recommends having for the course of all stone setting. And it's in like chapter 5 that we do the setting, that we do the sizing of a graver handle and everything.
Okay.
So I was figuring, like, if we go to the point where we set the stone, but we don't do our bright cut, because he doesn't talk about all of that until later, or I can, if people are really, really excited to do the bright finish, we can move that piece of the chapter back a little bit, but I wanted to give people time to buy the gravers and the handles. The handles are harder to find than the gravers. So.
Exactly why I was asking. But this is Karina, by the way. I know you've heard my voice a few times. I guess I can turn my camera on for a second. Say
Hey.
hi. But
Yes.
yeah, I appreciate the answer and
Sure.
moving
Yeah.
forward. Thank you.
Gravers are my personal challenge. Every single class that I've ever had from John, I've asked him to reteach me hand sharpening gravers because I can't get it. I get it and then I forget it. I get it and then I forget it. But sizing them is important, and we will do that live on one of the Zooms, probably 6 or 7 sessions from now is my ballpark guess.
Okay, cool. One other question tied to that. Does that technique work on copper as well as silver, or only on silver?
Well, let's find out. Make copper bezel. I think
I did.
I think it should.
What I did today following along was copper.
Nice.
So yeah, we'll see. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect my gut says it'll bright finish and then fade because copper is going to tarnish.
Mhm.
But I think it'll be a nice finish for a while. Like, it's a cool exercise, and it's certainly going to be easier to grave soft copper than it is silver, is my guess.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, you'll show us whether it works or not.
All right. I'll do my hair next time.
Anybody else have questions or things that you need help making sure you got lined up for next stages?
I have a question about the nails.
Yep.
I've heard before to use square nails. Is that what the flooring nails are?
That's what I was showing. Yeah. So they're rectangular-ish.
Ah.
Yeah. And it just gives you less to have to file, but also the steel quality in the, like, one of the things I don't like about common nail, 16 penny common, is that most of them are galvanized.
Yeah.
Have to heat them. You're burning off all kinds of really awful for you things. I don't think flooring nails are galvanized. I think they're just better quality steel because they're intended to be with the spring of the floor and the long-term use and all that. But they're beautiful, and they make, like, they're just so easy to turn into things. So either will probably do a trick.
What size are those nails?
I didn't know that. I don't know that flooring nails have a choice of sizes per se. So I buy the box that's like 2.5 inches long ish.
Okay, so there's 4 penny and 8 penny and I don't know, other pennies.
Yeah, so there's a penny conversion, just like there's a metal gauge conversion. This is looks like I've been buying 3-inch nails. So whatever
3 inches is. Okay.
Yeah, whatever a 3-inch. Yeah, and this is like, once you start playing with these, you'll want a box or 2 around because they're so quick to mod.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? All righty. Well, gang, thank you for joining me on my wackadoodle idea of a journey here. And yeah, let's make some John Cogswell style settings.
You rocked it. You rocked it.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah. And feedback is welcome via email. Hop on the Facebook group, whatever. Give me your ideas. What would make this easier? And everybody have a good new year and make some great art.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Bye all.
Thank you, Rachel. It was great.
Thanks.